in the wrong they were. The problem is that my sister and brother-in-law blamed me for the divide in their family, which didn't end well for them, as no one in the family was on their side about it. Absolutely everything was put on them and their bad parenting, and without me to blame, they just became silent and bitter. Half of the family don't even want to associate with them, and now their own kids are divided because the eldest refuses to change. It got so bad that my eldest nephew resorted to something so incredibly dumb that you're not gonna want to believe it. In the middle of the night, he sneaked out and assaulted my house with a pair of his dad's claw hammers. And I say a pair of them because he literally had one in each hand. The first thing he did was start by smashing the new lock on my shed, and this time it didn't break, but he heavily damaged it to a point that it was no longer usable, and I had to later remove it with bolt cutters. He also did a lot of damage to the shed door with the hammer's claws. I awoke to the sounds of hammers and called the police after peeking out of my window and seeing someone outside hitting the shed, though I didn't realize it was him at first because he had his face covered with a creepy looking mask. He saw the bedroom lights come on and chucked one of the hammers through my window. There was broken glass everywhere, and I'm lucky I didn't cut my feet on any of it because I was barefoot. Then my nephew started beating on my back door with the remaining hammer. He did major damage, breaking the knob and the window on the door, and also tore into the door itself with the hammer claw. I was worried the door wouldn't hold out, so I yelled police were on their way, and he took off before they arrived. Now, after my first initial incident, I installed a lot of cameras, and the night vision on my camera showed that it was him. He had a mask on, but was wearing his school hoodie, as well as his Nike shoes that were also pretty identifiable, since his brothers don't have a pair like them. His fingerprints were also on the hammer he threw at my window. My nephews had already all been fingerprinted when they were arrested the first time around, so police matched the ones on the hammer to him. When the cops came for my eldest nephew, he obviously denied it was him, but there's no one else it could have been. The other hammer was found in his room, along with the clothes and the mask that he wore, all of which were taken as evidence. But with this particular situation, this kid's parents did nothing to try to protect him, and they didn't try to pass the blame on me either. They just let their son be taken away screaming his head off. I wasn't there to see the arrest, but I was told by my sister that my eldest nephew was switching back and forth from crying that he didn't do anything wrong to screaming that it was all my fault and that he had to get back at me. The boy had to go through a serious mental health evaluation and was found to be possibly bipolar. It doesn't really excuse what he did though. Later on, he was properly diagnosed as bipolar, and he started blaming everything he did wrong on that, and he acted like he would be vilified just for getting treatment for it. Eventually, he ended up having a month-long stint in juvenile hall. They got my nephew properly medicated, and he pleaded guilty to forego court again in exchange for more community service and mandatory counseling, as well as probation this time. His dad came to my house and personally replaced the broken window and door, even though he barely said a word to me while doing it. My two younger nephews are still excluding their older brother from pretty much everything, and he still hasn't apologized for attacking my home either. He's also unfortunately repeating a school year because of how badly his grades tanked, which his parents are still very unhappy about. My two younger nephews dropped by on their own in July to personally apologize to me. They said that they always just followed their brother's lead, and he made everything they were doing seem like so much fun. But the punishments for the crimes are not worth the kind of fun they were having, and they don't want anything to do with it anymore. They want their fun uncle back, and they asked if we could just start over. I said we can, but you know what? They'll have to earn back my trust, which they happily agreed to. My eldest nephew had his 17th birthday a few months ago, and basically he got nothing for it, not even a cake. It was part of his punishment for what he had done. I can only imagine how much money he's cost his parents in the past year alone. He led his brothers to steal from me and then destroy my bedroom window and back door. I imagine in total with the lawsuit that I'd previously filed and replacing both the door and the window probably cost over $1,000. Doors and windows are not cheap. Meanwhile, my youngest nephew had his birthday a month after that and got a new mountain bike among his gifts. This really upset my eldest nephew, and he slashed the tires on the bike with a kitchen knife, which, you guessed it, landed him in even more trouble. I know a thing or two about fixing bikes, so I went out and bought new tubes and tires for the bike, and I put them all on myself. So the bike is fine, and my nephew thanked me a lot for fixing it. My eldest nephew resorted to trying to run away because he wasn't being enabled handled anymore. He just walked out, got on his bike with a backpack full of stuff, and rode off. His parents quickly reported him missing because he left a goodbye letter and basically blamed me and his bipolar disorder for all of his problems. In the letter, he stated that he couldn't wait until he's 18 to get away from all of us, so he was doing us a favor by getting rid of himself sooner. But he came back 3 days later without his bike or his backpack, and he was looking pretty beat up. He wouldn't tell us what happened, and we honestly still don't know, but he was chewed out for continuously using me as a scapegoat for all of his personal issues, because blaming me was the first thing he did when he got back. I didn't make him steal from me, and I didn't make him attack my house either. I also didn't make him run away. That was all him, and he nearly ended up back in juvie for running off because he violated his probation, but somehow he ended up getting off easy. Currently, he spends his day pretty much in his room when not in school. It's either that or he does chores or goes to counseling. He finished his community service, but his probation will last until he's 18 years old. He got some lenience for being diagnosed as bipolar, but it could not get him off the hook. And believe me, he tried many times. Once they told him what was wrong with him, it became his excuse for literally everything. But plenty of people go their whole lives with that same mental condition and never do the kind of things that he did. I've been mending things with my 2 younger nephews, but I don't want to be around the eldest at all, and the feeling is clearly mutual on his part. I've only seen him once in person the past few months, and he glared at me with more hate than I've ever seen from anyone before stomping away. He can't paint me as a villain anymore without being called out on it, so there isn't much he can do other than just try and get through this. For the most part, he's totally shut down since school started. I'm told he barely speaks, even at school. My other nephews tell me that he's getting laughed at and ostracized, which I don't think is going to help him get any better. My sister and brother-in-law are also not on the best terms with me right now, but they can't exactly put any blame on me either. They know that it was all them and their bad parenting. I've basically forced them to be more active in their kids' lives, which they should have been doing already from the beginning. They complain a lot of being tired from work as well as having to keep an eye on their kids. So whenever we talk as of late, it's always very awkward and very forced. We don't go to each other's houses anymore, but we do see each other at my parents' house, and our mother demands that we be civil there, which I honestly have no problem with. My 2 younger siblings have regained most of their privileges. They got their TV and video games back, but my eldest nephew isn't allowed on them at all. I'm told he's got some electronic entertainment in his room, but what kind I don't really know. I just know he spends most of his time in there, unless he has to be somewhere else. My eldest nephew is also not welcome pretty much anywhere in the family anymore. I've recently heard from my parents that they don't even want to see him on Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve this year because they are sick of his behavior and petty thievery. I guess I can understand that, but even I feel it's a bit harsh. My sister and brother-in-law do feel this way as well because they are threatening to boycott if he can't come to either holiday. I can't stand that kid and would not want him in my house either, so I can understand why they've made that decision, but I don't think excluding him from everything and everyone is gonna make him better. It's gonna take my eldest nephew a long time to mend bridges, and that's if they can even be mended at all. The way things stand at the moment is that he may try running off again once he's of age. That is, unless the last time he tried scared him off too much to try again. But hopefully things will get better for him in time if it's not too late to try to fix his behavior. I may not like him, but he is still my nephew and I do care for him, but I'm kinda powerless to do anything. So for now, the most I can do is just keep my nose out of it and offer support where I can. The nephew in this story sounds like an absolute psychopath. I mean, this kid destroyed and vandalized and did all sorts of terrible things. And it's crazy to think that all this therapy and all the medication and all the things that people are trying to do to help this kid are just not working at all. It's also kind of vindicating to see that the original poster cannot be blamed for this. It literally is the parents' fault, as well as, if not most importantly, this eldest nephew's fault. Like literally all the blame falls on them, and they should be ashamed of themselves for the way they've acted. They've caused a massive rift in their family, and it's literally their own fault. Like no one else is to blame except for this person. So hopefully things can work out, and this eldest nephew can try to repair the bridges that he burned, because this is just unacceptable, and if he ever wants to have any kind of family in the future, he needs to repair this as soon as possible. My great-grandmother is leaving an inheritance to me that should have gone to her kids, and now I'm not sure how to divvy up this money, or if I even should, just to try and make everybody happy in my family, and I'm honestly not sure what to do. So my great-grandmother passed away, and she was a hoarder as well as an evil witch. Honestly, nobody liked her, so she decided as a last farewell to give away the inheritance exclusively to the great-grandkids, and this would all go towards them when they turn 18 years old. Me and my brother are the only great-grandkids above 18 at the moment, and we will each be getting about $20,000 to $30,000 it seems. Here's the problem that lies behind us getting this inheritance. My great-grandmother did this despite the fact that her daughter, who is my grandmother, has cancer, and they are really struggling to pay the bills. Not only that, but my mother and father are trying to adopt and are trying to fundraise as well. My mother and grandmother don't have the best relationship, and if I give any money to either one of them, I will be offending somebody. I'm currently leaning towards giving it to my grandparents for a few reasons. For one, they have cancer, and that's absolutely terrible, and the money should be theirs in the first place, in my opinion. My grandmother put up with her craziness for years, and my grandfather regularly fixed up her cars and her house for free, and yet my great-grandmother still passed them up and decided to give this inheritance to her great-grandchildren. But again, because of the strained relationship my mom and my grandmother have, my mom will most likely feel spurned if I do this. I've thought about just giving money to both of them, but then the question becomes, how do I balance it? Should it be a 50-50 split? Which then leads me to believe that I think my grandmother would feel very upset of only getting 50% of the money for her cancer treatment, while my parents get the other 50% for an adoption. I'm also thinking that the best course of action is to paradoxically keep all the money for myself so that nobody feels left out and nobody can even have to worry about it. There is so much bickering on both sides of my family as both of them need money, and I just know that somebody's gonna be upset if they don't get the money that they feel they deserve. What should I do? This is a really terrible situation because I think you're right. This great-grandmother definitely sounds awful. She skipped over all of her family just to give money to her grandkids, which is fine, all things considered, but you would think you would at least give this to your kids first and then go down the line of seeing who wants money next. But I think one thing you really do need to realize, and maybe this sounds selfish of me, but this inheritance, regardless of who feels obligated to it or who just so happens to feel like they deserve it the most, is in fact going to be yours. No one else is entitled to it except for you legally. So if you decided to keep it all for yourself, there really is nothing anybody could do about it. Also, if you decide to give money away to people, I really don't think it's an all or nothing situation. You don't have to give all your money away to the grandparents or your mom or vice versa. Like, you certainly could give some money to them, but I honestly think you would be doing yourself a disservice by saying, oh, let me just give it all away and not keep any of it for myself. That's not fair for you in the slightest, in my opinion. So honestly, do with the money as you please. Follow your heart if that's what you want to do. But in the end, I think it's important to know that no matter how good of a job you do of divvying this up or how fair you are with giving away money, no one's going to be completely happy. It's impossible. You can't keep everybody happy and control everybody else's emotions, even though it seems like you have the best intentions in mind. That's just not possible. So I think you can at least give yourself a break in that regard and take some stress off your back, because nobody's going to be completely happy, no matter what you decide to do. But this also begs the question of what they would use the money for. Your grandmother definitely would benefit from getting this money to help with the cancer situation. I mean, that's personally where I would go first if I had this money and I was going to give it away to help people out. But for your parents, it sounds really strange that they want to try and adopt a kid, but they can't afford it. I mean, clearly they can't afford to adopt a kid, so it makes me wonder if they even will have the money to take care of the kid once they do have them. So for me, based on what you've described, that particular situation is something I would be a little bit more guarded and cautious about. But either way, literally the choice is yours, because you don't have to give this money away if you don't want to. And I don't think it's selfish to say, you know what, I'm going to use this money for me and my future endeavors, regardless of how happy or unhappy your family might become. Thanks for watching. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, use the playlist at the top of the description. And the next time you live stream, use the Cream of the Crop music. Search Cream of the Stream on Spotify or whatever platform you use for copyright-free music to use for your next stream. My entitled, spoiled, rotten older son is an absolute nightmare to be around, as he assumes that everything should be given to him at the drop of a hat. And now, after I told him no, he goes into an absolute rampage and starts a path of destruction, causing me and my neighbors to call the police just to have him arrested. Here's what happened. For context, I'm a 35-year-old female, and I have a son that was born when I was married to my first husband. I was young when he was born, and his father was very bad to me. My ex-husband's mom was constantly in our lives, trying to take over and make my son hers. I left my ex when I was in my early 20s, and my ex-mother-in-law ended up taking my son into another state and filing for custody. She went to a state that has grandparents' rights as ours didn't. I fought her for years and ended up getting remarried to my current spouse, and we had a son together when I was in my mid-20s, a boy who is now 10 years old. I see my oldest son only during the summer and the holidays. I finally got the court case moved to our local court, and the judge said that I was wronged and ordered shared custody and visitation. My ex-mother-in-law made a huge deal that my son needed to stay with her during the week because of school, and the judge went with it so he could finish high school in an environment he was familiar with. My ex-mother-in-law has ruined my son, by the way, just like she did her own. She's given him anything and everything he's ever wanted or asked for. She's taught him no respect and kept him very sheltered. She literally jumps on people if they don't give him his way. So in turn, my son is loud, violent, and all around sad to be around. So he came up to visit during Halloween and showed his awful self. My husband's mom leaves with us and she isn't well. She's doing chemo, she's been a big help with my youngest son, and she does that so that I can help my husband with our business. My youngest is a delight to be around. He's polite, funny, and respectful. We've taught him that you don't expect anything unless you work for it. I went and picked up my oldest, and his attitude started right away because his phone died and the charger I had in the truck didn't fit his phone. He wanted me to get off the interstate and buy him an overpriced one from a truck stop or something. I told him no, I'd get him one when we get into town, and that next time he needs to remember to bring one for the house and the car. I suggested making a packing list ahead of time. Now, my youngest was in the back with his tablet, playing quietly, and my oldest realized that the tablet was plugged into a car charger. He asked his younger brother for the charger, and I told him it's an Apple charger. It won't work with your Android. My oldest said, "You don't know that, shut up." The next thing I know, he's forcibly taking the Apple charger and he's trying to fit it into his phone, and when it didn't work, he threw it into the back seat of the truck. My youngest just plugged his tablet back up without another word, but I told my oldest son that his behavior wasn't acceptable. Fast forward to today, and my oldest son is still fuming at me because I made him wait, and he badmouthed me to his grandma. I left to go to the office, as did my husband, and my mother-in-law was going to take my youngest son to the treat trail for Halloween. She asked my older son if he wanted to go, and he told her to kick rocks. My husband told my oldest son not to speak to her like that, and I knew after that that trouble was brewing. I just didn't know how bad it really would be. Apparently, my mother-in-law and my youngest son went to the treat trail, and my older son called my mother-in-law to tell her he wanted some Hardee's, which is also known as Carl's Jr. My mother-in-law told him that there was food at home, and that it would be a while before she could get any. My oldest son told her that she needed to bring it to him right now, so my mother-in-law told him to either eat what was there at the house or to wait. And wouldn't you guess it, my older son started cussing at her and hung up the phone on her. My mother-in-law then called me, and I told her not to reward his bad behavior. I told her we had plans to go out anyways later to eat, and that he would be just fine waiting. When my mother-in-law gets home, she tries to open the door and her keys won't work. My older son comes to the door and tells her that he's angry and doesn't want her in the house, so he locked her out. He told her to wait outside until he either felt like opening the door or until I came home. My mother-in-law told him to open the door right now. She then called me crying, and I absolutely went off. I called my son and I told him that he does not make the rules in my house, and that he was supposed to go by them, and that he would be punished if he didn't open the door. At this point, he really thought I was playing, so I left the office and went home, and this is when disaster struck. I opened the door and my older son was there on the other side. My mother-in-law and my younger son had been waiting in her car, and my older son was blocking the doorway, saying that he told my mother-in-law to keep outside, and that this was her punishment for telling him no. I told him to move right now. I tried to push past him, and he pushed me back outside, threatening to lock all of us out. I went to go inside again, and he put his hand on my face and pushed me back out of my house. At that point, I had had enough, and I told him, "That's it, I'm calling the police." He didn't think I was serious, but I actually did call the cops. I told the dispatcher that my oldest son was refusing to let me into my own home, and he had just put his hands on me. And once I said this, my older son goes into an absolute pure rage. He comes out of the door screaming profanities, as well as threatening me. He tries to take my phone from me, and the lady tells me that she'll send someone right away. I mean, I had to literally wrestle with my older son just to keep him from breaking my phone. At that point, he then tries to go after my youngest son, and he actually tells him that he hates him, and that my youngest son somehow caused his life to be awful ever since he was born, somehow claiming that he is the only one that should have me as a mother. My oldest son also said that he was the only true son, since he was born first from my first marriage, which is absolute garbage. My mother-in-law then locks my younger son in her car, and the older son proceeds to kick, punch, and crack the windows, as well as the windshield of her car. The older son goes after my mother-in-law just as my husband pulls up. He's telling my mother-in-law that this is her fault, and that she just needed to do what he said. My husband tries to restrain him, but my older son is screaming that he will have my husband arrested. The police come and they immediately take over and restrain my son and put him into the back of the van. My husband and I explained the situation, and I told the officer that my ex-mother-in-law had shared custody with my son. So the officer calls up my ex-mother-in-law and tells her exactly what's happening. He puts her on speakerphone and she immediately puts blame on us, saying that we provoked him and that we are the abusive ones. The officer told her that didn't seem to be the case, as a neighbor had come forward and said that she had called 911 plus had a security camera that showed the entire thing. My ex-mother-in-law then jumps to saying that the police here can't do anything with my older son, as he's a resident of another state, which is again absolute garbage. The cop tells my ex-mother-in-law that this is obviously not the case, and it seems like my older son needs to learn how to be more in control of his emotions. The officer hangs up, and my ex-mother-in-law immediately calls me. I put her on speakerphone again because I know she's not the smartest thing to ever walk the earth. My ex-mother-in-law then said that if my older son was arrested, then it would prove that I'm a bad mom, thus proving and justifying what he had said and done, especially when it comes to him saying that he's the true son. She also verified this mentality by saying that he was my only heir, as he was my first son and from my first marriage, claiming that divorce is a sin. I told her that's not how it works. I told her I'm tired of him taking my house over and trying to hurt the people that I love. Long story short, he spent 3 days in juvenile lockup before having a hearing in front of a judge. The judge asked me what I wanted to do, so I requested that my older son be sent to a group home. My ex-mother-in-law fought the entire way, but had absolutely no ground to stand on, because both officers and my neighbor gave statements. Now my ex-mother-in-law is saying I'm ruining his life, and that I'm a terrible parent, which is honestly just ridiculous. The older son in this story is absolutely a nightmare. I mean, what in the world is wrong with him? This ex-mother-in-law absolutely did a number on this kid. It blows my mind that she had any kind of right to try and claim any kind of custody over this kid, even in the first place. And then she goes ahead and basically taints this kid's mind and turns him into this absolute nightmare of a human being. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous, and it's really unfortunate. So good for the original poster standing up for what's right and doing the right thing. You protected yourself and your family when it counted the most, and if I was in your shoes, I would have done the exact same thing. This next one came from the Am I the Jerk podcast subreddit. Check the links in the description if you'd like to submit your own story. Am I the jerk for sending a Karen to prison? I am a 27-year-old male and a father to 2 girls. We'll call them Annie and Amy. That's not their real names. And I was at the mall shopping with my sweet little girls when a woman who looks like the very description of a demon spawn started asking me where it is I found the dollhouse that I currently had. I responded by saying that it's actually in the aisle labeled toys. She said thank you, and then she went off on her way. Now, my kids are always in front of me, so I can never let them out of my sight, and I have disciplined them well to behave in public places. We're Asians who migrated here from the Philippines, but we look very much Japanese, since my parents are actually Japanese who lived in the Philippines and later migrated to San Francisco, which is where we currently reside. This will be important later. So when I was about to pay for my shopping, this woman started walking towards me with the security guard saying,
"That's him, sir. He stole that dollhouse from my shopping cart."
I got a little nervous as I am confused. First she asked me where this dollhouse was from, and now she's telling them that I stole it from her, which just doesn't make any sense. So the security pulled me out by my sleeve, out to the parking lot, with my daughters following behind with a nervous look on their face. So I asked if I can reason with the security, and apparently this Karen had already called the cops beforehand. The cops showed up and they interviewed both sides. So I told the cops, "Officer, I didn't steal that from her. She asked me where I got the dollhouse, and I simply pointed to the toy section. There is even security footage that they can look up to prove my innocence. The entitled Karen basically then called me a liar, saying people like me steal everything from us. And apparently all because I'm Asian, I've apparently stolen their homes and their jobs, and I should just go back to my home country. And at this point, my 7-year-old daughter is clinging to me tightly, and my 4-year-old is crying, wanting to go home. So after a few moments of reviewing the footage, the cops pretty much knows the entire story. We then proceed to paying for our stuff after that, and the cops asked me if I wanted to press charges, and I said yes. We then find out that this entitled Karen was under the influence of some illegal substance. The security apologized, since he dragged me out without even asking or reasoning with me first. Instead, he just jumped to some kind of conclusion. A few hours later, I decided to go back into the store to buy the latest God of War game, which I will be gifting to my nephew this December. It was the afternoon at this point, so the store is mildly crowded. To my surprise, there are only 2 copies left. I even met this guy while we were both looking at the game, and he said something to the effect of, "Oh, are you gaming for the weekend?" And so I just smiled and nodded to add to the conversation, since I'm not really a talkative guy for the most part. The store employee gave the copy to both of us, and I throw in an extra controller in the basket since they were already on sale. Right at the line of the counter, a lady again asked me,
Is that the latest God of War game? Oh, my boyfriend is gonna love it.
and I was like, oh no, not again. I sighed deeply and I faintly said to myself, here we go again. So I said to the lady, yeah, I am sure he's going to love it. Now, surprisingly, I got through the counter without any trouble, but here's where it gets worse. This entitled Karen tried bumping at me, hoping I would drop my bag and that we would somehow get our bags mixed up. To an extent, it kind of worked, but I said to her, hold up, let me check the contents of my pack. And to my surprise, a hairdryer is inside my pack. So I said, I think our bags got switched. At this point, the entitled Karen refused to give me my bag. So I restrained her and pinned her to the ground and called the police. I can tell that this lady is after the God of War game, as well as the controller I was getting. 10 minutes later, the police showed up and asked me to let go of the lady. Again, I told the cops that this Karen is trying to steal from me, and there's security footage to back up my statement, where it can obviously show that the bags got switched. The store employee also told the cops that there are 2 copies left of the game and I got the other one. I also have the receipt on my jacket's left pocket to prove it. Again, this entitled Karen is high, so she got charged with being under the influence of an illegal substance as well as theft. The best part of my day, though, is the fact that these are 2 different encounters. I encountered 2 different Karens in the space of a single day, and honestly, it just blows my mind. The luck that this original poster has is absolutely incredible. They got 2 Karens in the same day, and both of them were under the influence, which is honestly just baffling. I think if anything, you might want to go shop somewhere else, because it really sounds like some shady people are all over that place that you're going to. So no, I don't think you're the jerk. You did exactly what you need to do, and hopefully in the future, you can avoid these Karens and try to shop in peace. My entitled coworker, who made my life a nightmare while working at the same company as him, eventually gets fired and ends up being homeless. And he honestly has no one else to blame except himself. Here's what happened. So for a quick context, I used to work for 5 years at a call center we will call Ultima. Following my induction back in 2016, I was assigned to a campaign with the code name Quebec, which handles customer and tech support related to a driving app. I remember it because it was badly managed. People were constantly rotated, and we had at least 4 managers until the end of Quebec, which I will explain later. All of the people and corporation names have been changed, by the way, for personal and privacy reasons. On to the main story. It is January 2017. I was assigned to a new work team after my first supervisor and some of my coworkers were fired due to some sketchy fraud. I only survived because I barely interacted with anyone, even my supervisor. Shortly after starting with this new team, I headed off with 3 coworkers. We will name them Carl, Audrey, and Brianna. These are all fake names. As the 4 of us were together, I see that along came a 5th coworker, about 10 years older than all of us and looked like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. We'll call him Frank. I've seen him around, interacting with my then supervisor until his firing, but he was none of my business at the time. When Frank came to us, he came with an arrogant attitude, demanding us to shut up and to continue doing our respective jobs. I looked at Frank in disgust, thinking in my mind, who does this guy think he is? He then comes to me, looks at me in the eye, and says, I know you. Your team was kicked for committing fraud. You do as I say, or I will will have HR take you out. And at that point, I was like, what? Is he threatening me for no reason? Eventually, Frank just leaves, looking at me as if he had just stepped in a fresh dog turd. Following that whole ordeal, my friend Carl messaged me through a private chat and asked me what happened with my team. I told him that my team was sacked because of some fraudulent activity. He then replies that some guys of his team were also kicked out for the same reason. Another friend then joins the conversation and adds that since he became floor support, Frank has been on a power trip and demanding everybody to pretty much work like robots. And not only does he do this to our team, but he also barges into other teams, terrorizing them into silence. Carl then carries on and adds that people tried to report him with their supervisors and even HR, but they were unsuccessful because they were all playing favoritism towards him. We've continued working and chatting in the meantime, just trying to get through our time working here. Then comes March of 2017. Bruce, who was a then operations manager, resigned, and Michael, another operations manager from another campaign, took over. A lot of changes and a lot of names, and as a result, our team was split up. I was assigned to another team, and Frank was changed to morning shift, thankfully, so I wouldn't have to put up with his attitude for the time being. Fast forward to early 2018, and new changes came within the campaign, and you know what that means. Team changes were in the works. By this time, two of my original friends were no longer employees. I was teamed up with Carl again, as well as a few newcomers. But things got so much worse when Frank was assigned back to our shift. It turns out that the new manager got word that Frank has already been mistreating the morning shift, and she was not having it. Because of this, Frank got demoted and returned to the afternoon shift and was assigned to our team as the only one available for him. Even in his new role, Frank was still behaving like an entitled jerk, but this time he has become much more vindictive and much more apathetic. During this period of us having to work with Frank, things got so much worse. Whenever one of my coworkers was just trying to do their job, Frank would continue to upstage them, using his longtime knowledge as an excuse. Actually, he would do the same with all the other team leaders as well. One of these days, I was in a bad mood following a dispute with my supervisor over an unpaid day of work. The final straw came when I returned from lunch and witnessed how Frank called one of my coworkers a useless peasant. And this is when I snapped and yelled at him, telling him to shut up, as well as screaming about all the times he made this workplace a living nightmare. My supervisor saw this argument taking place and broke up the dispute and had me, Frank, and the coworker he was belittling called in front of HR to testify on what happened. Expecting the worst, as Frank was still friends with the HR staff, I alongside the HR representative who took care of this case. After having Frank and the coworker he was belittling give their version of the entire incident, I gave my final version of what happened. My supervisor also brought some video evidence that Frank was a jerk here. I was eventually let out of the meeting with only a verbal warning for foul language. Frank was eventually suspended for a week and sent to the graveyard shift. And for the rest of that period, things were mostly peaceful. Fast forward to March of 2020, and me, Carl, and another coworker were still in the fold, but several of my coworkers had finally just quit. We all had little to no contact with Frank because we were sick of all the garbage that Frank had put us through. It goes without saying that COVID-19 pandemic already hit, and we were all in the process of going to a home office situation, which means we wouldn't have to have any contact with Frank at all. Time had passed, and we were successfully settled into working from home. The only contact we would have would be between our team, as well as our supervisor and the floor supports. But this didn't last much longer, because as of June 1st, we received a link for a Microsoft Teams meeting. To keep it short, we were informed that because of the multiple complications the pandemic has put the campaign through, the client, who connected with the company, decided to put an end to Codename Quebec. I was offered to continue working in another campaign and actually accepted, but everybody else, including Frank, were all dismissed and lost their jobs. And now, as of November 2022, for the final time skip, I stopped working at my old company in June of 2021 to join another company. Some of my friends all threw a small party to try and celebrate it, and to my surprise, the supervisor that defended me was also there. While having a pleasant conversation and enjoying a night of drinks and fun, it was at that point that Frank's final fate was revealed to me. I was told that Frank was going around being obnoxious and blaming it on us for his current situation. It was also revealed that Frank had been unable to find another job and unable to continue to pay rent, so he was eventually evicted from his place. So Frank is now homeless, and that was the last time that we ever knew about him. And you know what? I don't feel bad about his fate, but I don't feel like rejoicing either. In the end, the only victim here was Frank, who did this all to himself. What a tragic story. I mean, talk about someone who absolutely had it coming. In my opinion, if you put negative energy out into the world like this, then karma is gonna come back to bite you, and it's gonna bite hard. I mean, this guy lost his job, and then he couldn't pay for rent, and now he's homeless. It's tragic, really, but if he was just a little bit better of a person, he probably could have secured some kind of letter of recommendation and found another job that he could do. So it's really just a sad situation. So if anything, this is just a lesson to treat people with respect, because you never know what kind of curveball life will throw at you. So it's better to be nice than to act like some power-hungry jerk like Frank. Thanks for watching. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, use the playlist at the top of the description. And the next time you live stream, use the Cream of the Crop music. Search Cream of the Stream on Spotify or whatever platform you use for copyright-free music to use for your next stream. An entitled, spoiled, rotten child treats me like garbage at my work. But after this kid starts crying because I simply corrected him, this kid's entitled parents then demand that I apologize. But I simply refused to do so, and instead flipped the script and told them basically in a roundabout way that they are awful parents. Here's what happened. So this happened earlier this year when I used to work at a kids cafe. Think indoor playground with a coffee kiosk for rich people. Basically on weekdays, we would have hour-long programs. It would be 30 minutes of an activity, such as story time, crafting, board games, stuff like that, as well as 30 minutes of playtime in the playground. On the weekends, we would do a 2-hour-long themed camp program, where we would only do activities for the full 2 hours, no playing on the playground. At work, I would always look busy when parents come to drop off kids or pick up kids. We are supposed to cheerfully greet kids as they come in, then give parents feedback on how their kid did when they leave. But the thing about giving feedback, we have to lie. We are not allowed to say anything negative about the kid's behavior. So needless to say, I generally avoided speaking to the parents because I honestly don't care. And I think parents should know the truth. But I also wanted to keep my job and not get reprimanded for breaking a company rule. One Saturday, I was in charge of leading a camp. For camp, we had scripts that we should follow. It was the very end of the camp, and all the parents were waiting outside to pick up their kids. The cafe is located in a shopping mall, and our supposed walls were giant glass panels, so everyone could see into the cafe. We were doing the last activity, which was to, quote, save the cute forest animals from a fire. The kids would take turns being a firefighter and run up and choose one animal to save, then bring it back and put it in the basket. I was sitting holding the basket with one hand and the script in the other, and 2 kids were left. I told one kid who's 8 years old to run up and save one of the animals. He grabbed 2 animals, so I told him, no, only 1 animal please. He then rolled his eyes and tossed the other animal to the side. He finally came down and put his animal in the basket. He asked to go again, and I told him that he could not do that because we had one more person to go who hadn't had a chance to get the animal, and it was almost time to go home anyways. He pouted and smacked the script out of my hand. He then laughed incredibly loudly, and it was honestly very annoying. I grabbed his hand and I told him to pick up the script and give it to me nicely, which he did. And I proceeded to tell him that his behavior was not nice and that now I wanted him to go sit down. At that point, he started crying and he sat down. I continued with the activity while he kept crying. My coworkers tried to comfort him, but he would ignore them and throw the candy that they offered him. So my manager came to me and told me to apologize to him for making him cry. I told her I didn't do anything to make him cry. He is just spoiled. The manager walked away, so I started to clean up the activity area. The manager came back and told me that this kid's parents were upset that I made their kid cry, and they demanded that I apologize. I look over and I see the entitled parents comforting their stupid child, so I loudly asked if they witnessed this kid's behavior. My manager said yes, but I was at fault for not comforting this stupid kid after reprimanding him. I loudly, especially so the entitled parents could hear, told her that I did not reprimand this kid. I told him to give me the script script, and I told him that what he did was not nice. The entitled parents called over my manager and told my manager they would not be coming back to a facility with cruel employees that would bully a kid like that. They threatened to leave a bad review. My manager apologized so many times. These entitled parents told her that they would only accept an apology from me to them, as well as to their stupid kid. And when they said that, I refused. And I told these entitled parents that maybe if their child had some manners, we wouldn't be where we are right now. The entitled mother was very upset by what I said, but the entitled dad didn't say much. They grabbed their things and they just left. My manager told me that I should know better and that I need to read up on the company's policies and rules about how to deal with parents. The very next weekend, that same stupid kid came back and talked to me like nothing ever happened. And you know what? So did I. I don't like holding grudges against kids, but the entitled parents, on the other hand, asked the manager to ask me if I have something against this kid. So again, I said loud enough for these stupid parents to hear, kids can't teach themselves manners or how to behave properly. The parents need to do that. So of course I don't have a problem with this kid. The entitled parents just looked at each other and left before my manager could approach them. I didn't have any problems with the kid that day, but I did hear from my coworkers that the two parents asked the manager what days I didn't work just so they could bring their stupid kid in while I was not there. This is such a hilarious story to me because you can tell the original poster literally does not care if they get fired. They are legitimately almost welcoming it at this point. Like they basically said, oh, you want to fire me? You want to say I'm not following company rules? Okay, let me talk a little bit louder. And you know what? The fact that these parents are not jumping in and being like, no, my kid's an angel, they would never do that, for me is probably proof that they know exactly what this person's talking about, and they know for a fact that their spoiled, rotten child has absolutely no manners, and they did nothing to have any kind of positive patterns in this kid's life. And what kind of company would encourage your employees to lie to the parents? Like if I was a parent and my kid was acting up, I would absolutely want to know if my kid went goblin mode and did something absolutely heinous. Like my kid's gonna be punished if they acted up like that. There's no excuse. So good for the original poster for putting their foot down. Clearly, I think the manager knows that they're in the right, and hopefully some policy changes can come around that will fix this weird rule that you've got to lie to parents about their stupid kid, especially if that kid was acting up and being completely obnoxious. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. This next one came from the Am I the Jerk podcast subreddit. Check the links in the description if you'd like to submit your own story. Am I the jerk for ghosting a former coworker of mine who was looking for a positive reference, but definitely did not leave his previous job in a good way? Here's what happened. So I work at a major university in the United States. I run a maintenance crew at night, and there's another shop who also works at night. We are in the same building, but focus on different kinds of work. Our shops get along great, and we usually help each other out on a regular basis. About 5 years ago, the other shop had an employee by the name of Bob. Bob was a really nice guy, but he was a physical manifestation of Pigpen from Peanuts. He was always dirty, he had torn clothing, he smelled terrible, and I won't even go into his dental hygiene. It was bad enough that his supervisor had to have a very uncomfortable discussion with him about using soap while washing and using deodorant. He made me uncomfortable more than a few times by alluding to his personal life with his wife, if you know what I mean. He wasn't explicit, but just thinking about how dirty he was made the mental image absolutely nauseating. Yuck. Well, he worked for this other shop for a few years when his marriage started having problems. As he put it, his wife was cheating on him with some previous boyfriends. Apparently, this wasn't the first time it happened, but he didn't want to divorce her since they had young kids, and he loved her so much. Well, he decided to deal with this situation in a way that basically got him fired. He had already been having some performance issues, and his supervisor really wanted to get rid of him. Unfortunately, at our university, getting fired is pretty hard to do. You have to get a warning, both informal and formal, multiple times, and then they can eventually let you go. It's a long, drawn-out process that frankly a lot of supervisors don't care to do. Therefore, there are lots of toxic employees that get away with terrible things. Anywhere else, they'd be gone in no time, but here, they have a lot of protection. There are ways to skip the line though. Obviously, bad things like violence or other harassment or even stealing can either get you fired right away or go straight to a final warning. If you screw up again after a final warning, you're done. Bob found himself in a very unique situation where he was able to skip the line. One day, his supervisor checked his work phone. As a fun fact, he is is not entitled to privacy when he's using university phones or their computers. And the supervisor very quickly found some disturbing information. He called HR and they put together a fact-finding. This is a small group of people who investigate complaints or claims of bad behavior to figure out what happened. A lot of the times, it boils down to a he said, she said situation, and things are hard to prove. However, Bob provided all the proof they would ever need. Bob's supervisor discovered he downloaded some scandalous photos on his company phone with links to dating sites and history to Craigslist personal ads. They also found that he had linked his personal email to his phone and found emails of him setting up his rendezvous. He was doing all of this at work and even had his rendezvous at work, if you know what I mean, often in a company vehicle. The most surprising part was that he was meeting up with people while he was married to his wife. Eventually, when confronted about these facts, Bob confessed everything during the fact-finding. I wasn't even there, but the other supervisor confided in me afterwards. He said it was the most uncomfortable conversation he's ever had. Apparently, once Bob started talking, he just didn't stop. He willingly divulged all these details about him meeting up with people and basically cheating on his wife. After the meeting, HR needed some time to process everything, but the general consensus was that he would be fired. He was pulled aside by one of his coworkers, and they advised him to quit before he was fired. He did and was gone a few days later. I felt really sorry for him about his situation. I told him that if he needed a reference, that I would be happy to provide one, since obviously his supervisor couldn't honestly give him a good one. He thanked me and was gone shortly after that. A few weeks later, I started seeing emails for references for him come in. I didn't give him glowing references, but I gave him positive ones based on the work I saw him do. Since I technically wasn't supposed to know about the circumstances of his departure, I left that part out of my reference. I was trying to help him out, and that was a mistake. I'm not sure if it was his hygiene or what, but this guy either couldn't get a job or kept getting let go because I got a reference check after reference check. In total, I probably did 30 over 3 years. At first, it was him applying for other government agencies. Our university is technically a state agency. And then it focused on custodial jobs at churches and offices. Then he finally settled on what he wanted to do, working in the public school environment. But this is where I started to get uncomfortable, because based on his history of having rendezvous at his previous job, I thought him working at a public school really would be a bad idea. He started applying in areas where he lived, but started reaching further and further out in desperation for a job. I gave him references, but they were very neutral at best. Eventually, he got to my kid's school district. Bear in mind, he lives about 100 miles away from my school district, so he really was reaching. In almost 3 years of searching, no one was hiring him, so he eventually just got all the way up to me, and something in me just snapped. I gave him the single most negative reference I have ever given anyone, and I told them flatly not to hire him. I didn't go into specifics, but it was strong enough that there would be no way they would hire him. After that, I decided to ghost any of his reference requests. After about 6 or 7 ghostings, he finally stopped using me. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't you just talk to Bob and say that you don't think it would be a good idea for him to work at a school? But honestly, that is a conversation that I really didn't want to have. There is no way that I could have had that conversation without letting him know that I knew about the circumstances of his departure and based